Hello and welcome to the Trail and Adventure Motorbike Podcast with me, Clive Barber, and my good mate, Noel Tom. For the days when you can't ride your bike, there's always the Trail and Adventure Motorbike Podcast. I am really delighted with these first two stories that we've got from Dan and Alan, and we've also got quite a few other people who are slotted in to come and record some other stuff for us as well. Some quite exciting stories by the sound of things. And I think what I really like about them is they're actually really achievable adventures. You don't have to work for 2 years, every hour God gave to take a year off, which any of us with families can't do on anyway. So it's like these mini adventures that anybody can have. Massive thank you to Dan and Alan for stepping up and doing this. Got two recordings today. First of all, there is Dan, who actually did a trip to Vietnam and makes it sound remarkably doable.
When you told me about Danny, I don't know, maybe it's just the name and it's just, I'm so conditioned by television, but I just imagined it was going to be, all right, I'm Danny. Yeah,
right,
it's Danny. Yeah, I went to Vietnam.
You fucking mug. No, not quite. And then we've got Alan, who's with us today, who did the coast to coast from Cumbria across to Northumbria. By my reckoning, that's some of the best trails in the UK. So we've got a few more people lined up, and I also encourage anybody else who fancies having a go to give us a shout. Drop us an email at the TAMP podcast.
What is it? Come on.
It's the TAMP podcast at gmail.com, or friend us up on Facebook and drop us a message on there. So here we go. User story number 1 from Danny. He's going to tell us all about his trip, a remarkable trip to Vietnam. I'll let him introduce himself.
My name's Dan. I live in Cannock in Staffordshire. I ride a KTM 530 EXC, and I've recently brought a brand new 390 Adventure. The type of riding that I do is mainly trail riding around the Peak District, but I do like to go on a couple of long distance trips, like maybe the Pyrenees or fly and ride, things like that. That's my big trips of the year. That I get 1 or 2 maybe, but mainly like trail riding and camping really.
You've got a couple of kids, haven't you, Dan?
I've got 3.
3. Hats off to you for getting out at all then.
That's it. We just had a lockdown baby.
We got a puppy instead.
Did you? Well, we got one of them as well. She asked if we could have a puppy, because I said I didn't want any more children. So she got the puppy and then she got pregnant. 2-0 to her.
I didn't want a third child. I was really happy with the 2 that we got. It seemed like a perfect setup. The youngest one had just started school. Everything seemed to be, life was going to get easier. And my wife insisted that I want another baby. And it was like, no. And in the end, we made a deal that if I could have an additional motorbike, she could have an additional child. So my third child knows he was swapped for a motorbike. I had to sell the bike because I couldn't afford to keep it and 3 children. You do get abroad a bit then? Yeah.
Last year I went to Spain. I did like a solo trip on the TET. I'm going to Spain again this year. And I'm also on a family holiday to Egypt, where I've booked a couple of days desert riding with a guy who hires out KTMs and takes you out into the desert.
That's fantastic. So riding in sand and in deserts is...
Yeah, it's one of my things that I've never had a chance to do, so I'll finally get a chance to do it.
I think it's something everybody has to do, whether it's Morocco or the Middle East or wherever, just because you've got miles and miles of freedom really to ride wherever you want. Sand riding's quite interesting because you kind of steer with your feet, because the minute you turn the handlebars you just kind of fall off. But
is that a good tip?
You just basically lean and squeeze the gas in, so the gas comes in and turns the back end round. You'll have a whale of a time. So that's the kind of thing us married men with children have to do, really, isn't it?
Yeah, I'd like the idea of going on a 3-month, 6-month trip, which is just not normal for most of us, is it? So.
Yeah, well, you've got responsibilities, and let's face it, not many of us could afford it. Do you want to talk a little bit about your biking history? So,
bit of a funny story, because I never actually ever planned on having a motorbike. I was kind of against it, to be honest. Like, I had a moped when I left school, like most people do, just a 50cc thing. But then I brought cars, and I was more into cars. I've always been into like modifying cars and stuff like that, because I work in a body repair centre. But I actually brought just a random thing. I brought a 1974 Honda CB360. I just wanted to restore it into like a cafe racer. But around the same time, I was kind of like, I kept getting these urges that I wanted to do a bit of travelling. I thought, well, if I build this bike, there's no point in me having it if I can't ride it. So I passed my test just for that reason only. And then I started to think, maybe if I could go travelling on the bike and mixing the two together. So it worked out all right, to be fair.
And have you still got that bike now?
I had it until very recently, but I've not long sold it to make way for the 390 Adventure.
How did you transition from the 350 to the KTM?
I had a few road bikes. The way I got into dirt bike riding was I'd restored a VW Beetle. Wanted to get rid of it. It was just in the way, really, on my drive. I put it up for sale, and some guy offered me a swap with a CRF 450X and a bit of money. So that was how I got into dirt bike riding, purely by accident.
What was the big event that got you into riding off-road?
Most people watched the Long Way Round series. I didn't actually get to see any of them till a few years ago. I actually saw an episode of Top Gear where they all went to Vietnam and brought bikes and just rode around the country. And that was kind of like at the same time where I was starting to really get this urge to go travelling. So I was speaking to a friend of mine who had just passed his test as well, and we just got this crazy idea together to go to Vietnam and just ride dirt bikes, and that's how it happened. It was an 11-day trip altogether, but we were there for 10 days, and we hired a guide to take us. When we got to the guide lockup where he keeps all his bikes, just by chance that was the same company that had looked after some of the lads in Top Gear as well, and Richard Hammond's bike was there, the one that he turned into a boat at the end of the episode, and it was like a big pink flamingo thing or something, and I got to sit on it and have my photo took with it, so that was pretty cool. He supplied the bike. He took us with him and his uncle, who was the mechanic, and we went. There was 4 of us on the tour. We would like ride around the countryside in the day, do some off-roading. Started easy with us to start with, and then we'd end up each night. We'd always be in like this like wooden hut in the middle of the jungle with like local people living in their house. It was crazy. It was always different. We kind of did a loop from the start point around and then ended up back up at their lockup. It was really varied. There was a tarmac to start with because we had to get out of the city. Then he'd take us on some like gravel roads and dirt track all through to mainly when we were in the countryside. It was mainly gravel roads, which is one of my favourite types of riding, but then there'd be the occasional rocky section or mountain passes that were just mud because of the rain.
So what kind of cost are we talking about? Presumably there's a flight to Vietnam, which is going to be, I guess, quite expensive.
The flight, from what I remember, was £530 return. This was 2018, I think. Then the tour cost us $600, which was about 450 quid, I think. It was which is good value, I think, because each day you get in the bike, all your petrol's paid, all your food's paid, all your accommodation's paid.
So that's £450 for 10 days.
The first tour with them was only 4 days.
Still pretty good value.
When we got back, we hired our own bikes then and then travelled around on our own after that. Really cheap. Towards the end, I was just spending money just because I had all this Vietnamese money that I couldn't do nothing with when I got home. So I was just wasting money, really. You could have done it a lot cheaper, but I think for the whole trip, I spent like £1,700.
Superb for a 10-day trip.
So friendly, and they really appreciate the tourism, I think, especially in the countryside. There was this one time it was like with the top of the mountain, and we'd come down, and then there was this little hut on the side of the road. And it was an open hut with about 10 children in there. And they saw us, we pulled over, and they all started running out like dead excited and that. And that was actually their school. They were getting taught in this hut outside. So we gave them some little like sweets and that. They were all getting really excited. And all of a sudden this local girl, she was about 20, she come grab me, walked me off and took me into her family's home. And they were all making me drink rice wine with them, and it was absolutely mental.
What bikes were you riding out there?
The standard bike that they supplied was a Honda XR 150, but we could upgrade it to a CRF 250L. That was like their kind of the best bikes they do over there. I was on the 150 because I'd obviously only been riding about 6 months.
Any other highlights of the trip?
One time we were riding up this big mountain. It was absolutely hammering down with rain, and it was mud everywhere. I was like falling off constantly. I had no idea about how to ride mud. The guide says if we fall off, it's a 600-foot drop. So I was really nervous, and I remember I was so scared. I just kept thinking of my missus and my kids at home. All of a sudden, coming back the other way, there was a woman on a scooter with 2 kids on the back and then a big box of chickens, and none of them had helmets on. And I just thought, oh, you need to man up here, man.
I bet she didn't have knobblies either.
No, nothing. In flip-flops as well.
What's the food like out there? I know Asian food can be fantastic.
I really liked it, but there was some things I only ate because I didn't want to offend them, like complete fishes that had been fried, the eyes and everything. One of the meals that we kept getting was fried crickets. They cooked them in this really sweet sauce, so you didn't really taste them. They were just really crunchy. But the rest of the food I really liked. There was a lot of chicken, a lot of the spring rolls out there are just unbelievable. And they don't use knives and forks either. It's always chopsticks.
That trip kind of inspired you really to carry on once you came back to the UK, I guess.
Yeah, it did. I'll be honest, when I first got back, I didn't really want to do much off-roading because it was such an intense experience. As the weeks went on, I started getting the bug for it, and I was like really wanted to have more experience off-road. So that's led into a bit of a obsession now, and that's all I think about really. Trail riding.
Welcome to the club.
Kind of takes over your life, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. And it's difficult with a family, but I mean, I don't get out so much as I used to, but I used to plan at least one ride a month, one day out with my mates a month. And I think if you put that in the diary and give the family enough notice, you can usually make it work.
I get like 1 day a month, for definite. And then try and get like maybe every couple of months, do like a weekend with a night stopover or a camp or something like that. And then the big trip each year.
Pretty much what I get. Have you done many other parts of the UK?
Done down to Shropshire, which is not too far from me. And they've got some good lanes down there. I'm in their local TRF group as well as the High Peaks and Potteries. Done the Cornwall section of the Tet. Did that a couple of years ago. We did that on big bikes, to be fair, because we didn't really know what was going in for. But luckily we didn't get anything too gnarly.
Have you been down that big bike route then before you got a smaller one?
I had a Triumph Scrambler, so it wasn't really an adventure bike, but I kind of set it up for a bit of light trail riding. I did love that bike. It just the thing that let it down was the fuel range, to be honest.
I really like them, especially the new one. But they're 12, 13 grand or something crazy like that, aren't they? New. When are you going to Spain? We might see you there.
I just got back from the solo trip in October. But while I was on the ferry, because I was on my own, I met this guy who was with a couple of mates, and he was doing a bit of a trail riding trip as well. He met another guy while he was out there, and the three of us kind of got in contact through WhatsApp. And now we've kind of do a few rides together and trips together now. But we're doing this big Spain trip. We're doing, I'd never heard of it until recently, but it's called the ACT, which stands for Adventure Country Track. It was set up by Touratech, I think. They do 5-day route in different countries. They've got Portugal, Italy, Greece, Romania, and now they've just released this one in the Pyrenees, which looks really good. They've done an hour-long film on YouTube, and we're going to try have a go at that.
It's different to the Tet, presumably, because obviously the Tet runs through the Pyrenees as well.
Yeah, I mean, everyone knows the Tet, and I don't think I'd ever get bored of it, but this just looked like something that not many people had heard of, so we just thought we'd give it a go.
That's another fantastic example of something, whilst it's a bit more expensive, is very achievable for anybody. So an interesting thing, it's probably gone up since he did it, but price of a flight to Vietnam was £550. For that same money that you can get a trip for 10 days to Vietnam for, you could go on a 2-day course in mid-Wales and learn how to ride a dirt bike. What would you rather do?
I thought what was interesting about the Vietnam story, Dan didn't focus much on the terrain and the trails. He said he was quite inexperienced actually off-road riding, but he told us about the places they stayed, the school that they visited, and really it got a bit of the culture and the people, and maybe that was missing a little bit from where my trip was very much in the comfort zone. You were never going to struggle to find petrol in a coffee shop. We enjoyed the off-road riding element, whereas Dan's story was much more of an adventure experience about the culture of Vietnam.
It's a very good point. I also loved the way he talked about his next trip to Egypt, where he's actually combining a family holiday with a couple of days riding in the desert as well. Very smart move.
Don't get any ideas.
No, I think it's a great idea. Problem is, the current Mrs. Barber always books the holiday, so maybe I'll have to get on the case and book something before she does.
I think that's planted a great idea in a lot of people's heads. Where can I go on holiday and also hire a bike and disappear for a day? As long as you don't have to eat crunchy fried crickets.
So the other thing Dan mentioned was the Touratech Adventure Country Tracks, the ACTs. So I've done a little bit of research on them, and they're kind of linked. There's the BDR stuff in the US that Touratech in the US have done. So there's a number of countries here, very similar to the tech, where you can go in and download a GPX route. Dan mentioned all of the countries. So it's free to join up, and it's free to download the GPX routes. So the one, for example, for the Pyrenees, it's just a straight line, as you said, from Santander across to the other coast across the mountains. They do ask for voluntary contributions, or you can join up as a pro member and get a few additional benefits. But the GPX things are all completely free. But they cater for big bikes. So if you've got a GS, if you've really not been listening to this podcast and you've still got your stupid big bike, you can go and do a trip on it. I'm joking. You can still go on the ACT and it's gravel tracks, and there's nothing technical in there that you're going to that you need to worry about. So you know when you set off in the morning, everything on your big bike is going to be achievable. And I think the one for the Pyrenees was 55% off-road, 45% road. They're something definitely worth having a look at.
It's just amazing, isn't it? It seems like, well, it was only about 10 years ago that if you wanted to do this, you had to sort of, I remember somebody saying that they had it was like a road book. It was just sheets and sheets of paper for this route across the Pyrenees. And they were sort of selling it, one person was selling it to the next for God knows how much money. And it was such sort of privileged secret information, this fabled route across the Pyrenees. And now,
well, the guy that did that American one, the first American one, which was, I think, coast to coast in America, used to pay about $400 for it.
Yeah.
And it was etiquette not to share it with anybody else, because he'd spent years researching this route, and that's how he made his money now.
Yeah, it's just fantastic, isn't it, now, just to be able to share it like that.
Yeah, kudos to Mr. John Ross and Touratech. Good on them.
Amazing.
Now it's time for our second listener story, recounting his tale from coast to coast. Tell us who you are, how old you are, and where you're from. Go.
My name's Alan Breeze. I'm 39 and I'm from Derbyshire. I just wanted to tell the story, the full version of my coast to coast trail bike trip that took place back in June of 2021. Trip went from the east coast, Saltburn by the Sea, across to the west coast to Askerman Furness, then back to the east coast at Whitby, and finally back up to Saltburn to complete the loop. The trip was all centred around riding on the coastal trail along the beach at Askerman Furness. So the story really starts back in 2017. With my mate Simon, I went to an event called Dirtquake, which is a flat track event. Really had a great time. I've been to all sorts of bike events over the years, but there was a very relaxed atmosphere at this event, and guys sliding sideways on bikes with big grins on their faces, people falling off left, right and centre. But the thing that really stood out to me, that nobody seemed to get hurt. Everyone was just jumping up, having a laugh. Campsite was absolute carnage, all kinds of different bikes, and people with just tarps slung up to the side of the bike, laid under a sleeping bag, who travelled over from Belgium on two-stroke scooters and all sorts of things. So it just really seemed to be like so much fun, so much energy around the bikes and just the atmosphere of the whole thing. Off the back of that event, I finally decided that it was about time I got myself a motorbike. So I went and got a D2 125, and I set about exploring the Peak District in our local area. I was quite familiar with the area from a lot of mountain biking, and I was quite experienced with map reading and stuff, so I started to find some green lanes. I managed to get my mate Simon out, but he was just on his road bike to start with, so we'd take it in turns to jump on the DT and have a go up and down some lanes, and he wanted in on this too, so he went and got himself a DR350, and the two of us really formed the Breeze Riders Club, and we started to have our little adventures. We'd maybe do 5 green lanes in a day, and probably usually one of us would break down or get a puncture or something, but we were just always got a smile on the face and always enjoying it. Didn't take long then to start getting a few more members together. Once the photos started to go up on social media, 3 or 4 of us going out, then 5 or 6 of us, and I think currently we're up to about 10 members. 4 of us were really keen to get camping, and were very much inspired by the Mondo Enduro Austin Vince film, with the idea of loading the bikes up and going off self-supported with all your tools and equipment and your camping kit. And this is around about the time that I started listening to a few podcasts and watching videos on YouTube, and first heard about the Trans-Euro Trail. And I also became aware that the TRF do a coast-to-coast trip each year. I set about trying to get hold of the GPX file for this coast-to-coast. I eventually did manage to get that, and I also found a Land Rover 4x4 route that went coast-to-coast as well. Plus the TET itself goes basically from the Lake District up to Newcastle. So by overlaying all these routes onto one map, I kind of conjured up this idea of my own crazy route that would take in 300 miles in each direction of as many green lane trails as possible, plus hopefully some wild camping and of course the chance to ride on the beach at the far end. Well, once I got the route organised into sections, I shared this idea with the rest of the club members, and everyone was just really starting to get excited about it now. And we were working on our luggage systems for the bikes and who was going to take which tools. We were practicing changing tyres ourselves and basically over preparing, but in a fun and exciting way. One thing I decided not to plan was where we were going to stay each night. I thought we've got this route figured out. We'll do the riding, and each evening we'll look around for a place to camp, and if we can't find anywhere, then jump on Google, and we've got options for campsites or maybe staying in a room in a pub or something like that. I remember day one of the trip was a really early start. We set off in the van up to Saltburn. Pike had come off a night shift, so he slept most of the way up. We arrived at the location we'd arranged to park the van with a friend of mine up there, and loaded up the 3 bikes and sort of excitedly set off. And within about a mile, we had to pull over in a lay-by and just sort of actually set up the GPS and stuff. We had that initial moment of there's no going back now, and we better put some fuel in the bikes. So we dropped into Saltburn itself, picked up Mike, who'd made a different way up using a trailer. We posed on the boat ramp at Saltburn for a photo. Got a passerby to take a snap of us on the coast. Set off then onto the first few lanes, and it was within about an hour of the trip starting. We'd only covered 3 or 4 lanes, and we arrived at this flooded green lane, an absolute swamp. There was submerged 4x4 tracks under the surface, so there were deep ruts that we couldn't see. It wasn't long before water level was reaching up to pretty much the exhaust on the KLX, so almost the seat. Had to switch off, and we had to grab the tow rope out and rescue the bike, but we were sinking in the mud and water's coming over our boots, and it took 3 of us really to wrestle the bike out, and jackets and helmets had to come off because we were boiling hot, and we'd only covered about 30 miles, so I just thought, what on earth have we got ourselves in for? But we managed to get going, and it wasn't long until the socks had come off and got bungee strapped onto the front fender to dry out, and we were laughing about it and back on our way. And then we started to make good progress as far as Scotch Corner, where we stopped off for a lunch break. The next area I remember was around Richmond and Reeth. Some brilliant green lanes there that are part of the TAT, get up nice and high, and some fantastic views, dropping down some quite technical rocky trails and getting into the late afternoon. So we decided to grab our phones out and find a place to camp. Everywhere looked too remote for wild camping and too exposed, too visible to all the farms around. And we decided with the size of the group that we'd drop into a campsite. We found a great little farm campsite, got the tents up, jumped back on the bike, shut off for fish and chips. By this point, we're like in full adventure mode. We're imagining that we are on Mondo Enduro. Second day, we set off out of Reeth, but we had our first major mechanical or bike problem of the trip. Pike's DRZ was doing this horrible stumbling idle where it would just do a huge backfire every 10-15 seconds, and you couldn't wind the throttle on at all with no idea what was going on with it. So we've got the spark plug stripped out, the carb in pieces, and we were at it for hours on the side of the road. I remember shooting off just to go and fetch some cold drinks and stuff. I needed something to do because there's just pieces of bike and tools all over the place. We eventually managed to trace the problem to the stator, which seemed to be an irreparable issue, so we had to tow the bike across to a pub, and sadly Jake had to drop out of the trip. He managed to get picked up by a friend in a van, and Mike decided the same day that he's got some pain from his knee, which he'd bashed toppling off in ruts the day before, and that was a injury, so he decided to drop out as well, which just left myself and Prov. So only just at the start of the middle of day 2, we really started to wonder if we were going to make it at this point. We were chatting on the intercom and saying, look, we've just got to go for it. We've got to get the miles in now. I mean, we know these bikes can do it. We've just got to be brave and get cracked on. Rode from Reeth to Kirkby Stephen on that second afternoon, and until late in the evening, until we were really too tired to continue. There's a lot of long, shaly sort of green lanes up round Hawes that had really taken us out for us just standing up on the pegs for miles after mile after mile. Started to think about a place to camp. We saw a little caravan park and decided to pull in there, see if they knew where there was a campsite. And they said, oh, you can stick a tent up here if you like, lads. It'll be tenner and the bar's over there. We just landed on our feet. And this is where our luck started to turn. In the bar, it was a pound for a bottle of Hobgoblin because they got some to get rid of. So we helped them out getting rid of a few of those. Day 3 was, again, just the two of us. Set off in the morning, headed for the Lake District, full of excitement. Remember clearly the Borrowdale Pass being a really tough lane with loose stones the size of potatoes just rolling away under your back wheel all the time and jamming up your front wheel. So especially with the weight of the luggage and stuff, we were just getting stuck a lot and having to sort of bounce the bikes to free them. And I was definitely abusing my clutch.
Editor's note, I think you might mean breast high pass here, as you were.
And I watched back on the GoPro video, I was just going stupid with it because I was frustrated, but got to the top of there and realised now that my clutch was slipping, the revs were flying away sometimes and with hardly any drive, and managed to get down the other side and continue riding. We were limping along on flat road sections was okay, but it really wasn't going to make it over any more green lanes, and it certainly wasn't going to make it all the way back to the van. We ploughed on and we got to Windermere, went across on the little chain ferry there. We met our first fellow Tet rider and had a good chat with him, and we carried on all the way to Askham-Furness. We pulled up in the car park just before this coastal trail and walked down onto the beach to have a look at it, but really full of disappointment now. I just couldn't dare to take the bike onto the beach with the clutch out. I just knew that I was going to get stuck, and really just feeling so deflated that this was possibly the end of the trip. We might be looking at another AA or RAC rescue and then making the tough decision whether to continue on his own. Once again, the phones came out. We managed to find a farm campsite nearby. We set off riding there, and actually I remember on the way it was the first time we'd had a heavy rainstorm and the roads were really greasy. Just as we were coming into the campsite entrance, there was a Honda Gold.We on its side with the driver and passengers sort of stood staring at it, so we helped them out to right that back onto its wheels and pulled into this campsite. Managed to speak to the owners and find a place to haul up, and got the tents up and trying to make a decision how on earth we'd try and approach this problem. Started looking at Kawasaki dealers, trying to see if a spare clutch would even be possible for the next day and ring him round. I decided to ring the guy that I bought the bike off, who's well known for his KLX collection. I thought if anybody's going to have a spare clutch available straight away, it's going to be KLX Bob. Sure enough, he said, I've got one here, I just couldn't get it to you, but if you get one of your mates to pick it up, then you're welcome to it. You can sort out pay me later. Jake, who broke down on the DRZ, had just made it home. He'd already got the days booked off work and he was looking to jump on his road bike and go for a ride. He decided to go and pick up the clutch from right down in Sheffield, ride all the way back up to the lakes, come and meet us. And he managed to recruit another mate to come with him. So they jumped on the road bikes, had a blast back up to us. The following morning, we'd strip the bike down, obviously drop the oil into pop bottles, making funnels out of Coke cans and all sorts. Got the new clutch back in hand and swapped it over, but when we put it back together, we just couldn't seem to get it right. It took us a few goes to get it sorted, and I was absolutely tearing my hair out. There was a huge centre nut, I remember. We managed to borrow a half-inch impact gun off the farmer, which was just unbelievable. Everybody was so helpful. The guys sitting opposite who were watching us struggle with it gave us a burger off the barbecue and helped us keep going, and eventually we managed to get the thing back together and working. I've still got the burnt out clutch plates. I tucked them away in my backpack as a souvenir. I remember it was a wet and blustery night and hardly slept. I remember thinking to myself, I hope this is going to hold together now. Like we may have just pulled off a miracle, but what's going to happen in the morning? Day 4, and we dropped down onto the beach again, back down at Askham-Furness. This time we rode on with much excitement and doing runs up and down the beach, sort of excitedly waving our legs and beeping our horns as we were celebrating the victory of making it from east to west at least.
Second editor's note, there is indeed a green lake, well I should say sandy lane, that runs the length of Askham-Furness Beach. But please make sure you know where you're going. There is private woodland and protected areas along there, so just do your due diligence. Don't go anywhere you shouldn't be.
The realisation came that we'd basically left ourselves 2 days now to complete this trip. So we got back off the beach and decided to find a jet wash, blast all the sand and salt off. We headed back up through the lakes on the road to save some time. We did about, say, 50 miles road riding and 100 miles trail riding that day. We were absolutely exhausted. We got some great photos at the river crossing at Kirkby-Stephen. Prov was up on the bridge taking photos, and Jackdaw, who we named Simon, landed on his arm. And it came out perfectly on the GoPro, and I got some shots of it as well. Just one of those bad moments that you never forget. We rolled back into the caravan park where we'd stayed before, the cheap beer. Really feeling now that the bikes are going well, and hopefully we're going to make it back. So day 5 was a huge day from Kirkby-Stephen all the way to Whitby. And we retraced most of what we've done and then picked up the Rutland Rig Trail, which I believe is one of the longest in England, about 9 or 10 miles of hard-packed stony trail. Completed that one and carried on down into Whitby, and once again just a fantastic feeling as the sea came into sight, and we headed down for another round of fish and chips. Grinning from ear to ear as we were excitedly snapping some photos that we completed the coast to coast both ways. We couldn't wait to send the WhatsApp message and tell everybody that we'd finished it, till I noticed in the picture that my tent was missing off the back of my bike, so I had to retrace a few photos to try and figure out where I've dropped it. But we did actually go back and look, but still never managed to find the lost 20 quid tent. So that pretty much put an end to things. We rode back up to the van, met back up with my friend who looked after the van for us. Obviously tried to excitedly recount this story as I've just have to you now. We completed 731 miles in 5 days. I can honestly say they were most exciting and enjoyable 700 miles of any journey that I've ever done. If this story just inspired one person to do what I've done, to jump on a bike, just get your L plates, go and start having some fun, start exploring, and then set your sights on a little adventure. You don't have to ride around the world. You can have just as much fun. Once you're 20 miles from home, out on the trails with your mates, you're just going to have the best time of your life.
When you did your coast to coast, Alan, did you find at the end of it, did you think, why isn't everyone doing this?
Yeah, that's absolutely what I thought.
Because some people do talk about these coast to coast routes, but you get the feeling that there aren't masses of people doing them. I know the TRF organise a few now and again, don't they? But you'd think it would be more of a thing, wouldn't you, as a trip to do in the UK?
There's something satisfying about travelling from one side of the country to the other and actually sort of trying to get that photo where you're dipping your wheel in the sea and actually making it onto the beach at the far side, that gives it sort of that scale. And for me, laying out the GPX onto the map and then following it, it was all about the terrain. And you're doing it blind, like you've only ever done it as a line on the map, so every single lane is brand new to you, and that's everyone's favorite trail riding feeling, is coming around a corner and like, wow, look at these rocky steps down to a stream, and loads of fun. And the reason I wanted to tell it is just because it's so accessible. The Vietnam story is fantastic, but I didn't have to buy any flights or anything. We had a tank of diesel and we could have rode the whole thing. It was only to save some time that we went up and started it from the van.
What do you reckon it did cost you to do was it 4 or 5 days?
Maybe 300 quid, something like that. Not much at all. It was £10 a night camping. We bought a few pub meals and a couple of pints and things like that, putting fuel in the bikes.
You would have eaten anyway, right?
Exactly. So the lowest budget adventure you're going to get, I think.
For days away from home and considering you're on holiday, that's a reasonable amount of money, isn't it? And for what you're getting out of it, especially.
Yeah, so many memories. I mean, I went a bit over the top, really, with the detail, but as I was telling the story, I was just flicking through all my shoot and ride photos, using that as the prompts.
The other thing you mentioned was you put a lot of time preparation into it. I just think, knowing from when we go away, that whole preparation thing is actually part of the fun, isn't it, really?
Yeah, I've got some photos of every bit of kit laid out on the garage floor, and then how the hell is all this going to fit on the bike? But you manage it somehow, and like you say, you have a couple of goes and you're taking things out. And we got some good experience of just practicing, from mechanicals. But it happened that we had things that we couldn't have imagined that would happen, and that's why it was so exciting. Really, was how to deal with those problems. But the everyday sort of skills that we learned for punches and bits and pieces of just tweaking your chains and stuff like that. That all comes in useful all the time when you're trail riding, not just on your big camping trips and stuff.
Is there anything you would have done differently, do you think, if you were to do it again?
Well, I am going to do it again. We're going to make it an annual thing. I missed out quite a bit around the lakes because of the problems, so I want to go back and...
Oh, you missed the best bits.
Yeah, I want to go back and focus on some of the stuff in the lakes that we had to miss. So I'll just mix up the route and focus on different areas, but still, I think the concept of as I said, crossing the country is so much fun that we'll just do it again, and it'll be slightly different. You know, some guys that couldn't come, some that didn't make it to the end and stuff. So it will be different enough.
So where did you go to work out your route?
The kitchen table. Did you not listen to it? He's told you this already.
I don't remember this bit.
Oh, for fuck's sake, listen to it again. People that are listening to this just heard what he said.
I did mention that I sort of overlaid a few different GPXs of other people's routes and sort of tried to use the best bits and tweak it to what I wanted it to do, because the TRF one didn't finish with the beach ride that I wanted, and I really wanted to start from Saltburn.
I liked your final words, Alan, just encouraging people to do it.
This is a little bit embarrassing, but you could hear my voice crack as I'm a little bit emotional at the end. But I knew that if I did it again, I'd just do the same thing again, because it's that sort of proud feeling, really, that and I do get a bit gooey when I'm talking about it. But that's one reason why I wanted to tell the story, and obviously it's very significant for the guys who were there and the guys who will come on the next one. But hopefully it's inspirational for the other listeners, all 6 of them.
So there we go. A massive thanks again to the guys for doing that. Really appreciate it. Hopefully you've enjoyed that and got some inspiration for ideas for trips. So keep them coming. You know where to contact us. The TAMP podcast at gmail.com or via our Facebook page. See you later. Thanks for listening. We really appreciate your support. Don't forget you can follow us on Facebook and Instagram. And if you really appreciate what we do, you could consider supporting us on Patreon or buy us a coffee. Links are available on our website, which is tampodcast.com, tampodcast.com, where we also have a limited selection of branded stuff. But either way, please keep listening and spreading the word. See you next time.